Let's talk about one of history's greatest intellectual tragedies, the disappearance of the Library of Alexandria. Now, this wasn't just some old building full of dusty scrolls. Nope. This was the beating heart of the ancient world's knowledge. And its loss, it set humanity back in ways we're still trying to wrap our heads around. So, how on earth did the ancient world's internet get deleted? Seriously, just for a second, imagine this. You wake up tomorrow, and the internet is gone. I don't mean your Wi-Fi is down. I mean the whole thing. Every server wiped, every database erased. All our science, our art, our history, poof, vanished. The scale of that loss is it's almost unthinkable, right? Well, that's exactly the level of catastrophe we're talking about with the Library of Alexandria. For the ancient world, this one place was the closest they ever came to a global network of information. People have called it humanity's hard drive, and that's the perfect way to think about it. It wasn't just a place to store books. It was a revolutionary idea to centralize the collective knowledge of civilization, to bring the discoveries and stories from the entire known world together under one roof to be studied. So, what was the thinking behind a project this audacious? It was nothing less than an attempt to build a universal brain for all of humanity. The whole story kicks off with Alexander the Great's vision for a new capital city that would connect Europe, Africa, and Asia. But after he died, his general, Ptolemy I, took over Egypt, and he had an even bigger idea. He wanted to make Alexandria not just a hub for trade, but the undisputed intellectual capital of the entire world. And his grand plan to do that, around 295 BCE, was the Great Library. And the scale of this thing was just mind-boggling. At its peak, historians think the library held up to 700,000 papyrus scrolls. Let that number sink in. For the ancient world, that's an almost unimaginable amount of information all gathered in one single place. And get this, it wasn't just some quiet place to read. The library was the heart of a much bigger complex called the Museum, the Temple of the Muses. Think of it like a state-funded super institution. It was a university, a research lab, and a think tank all rolled into one. The greatest minds of the day lived and worked there full-time, with all their needs taken care of so they could just focus on discovery. Okay, so that brings us to the big question. What was actually on those hundreds of thousands of scrolls? What kind of world-changing knowledge was being cooked up inside this ancient powerhouse of science? Well, first let's talk about how they got all that stuff. The Ptolemies were, let's say, aggressive collectors. Every single ship that docked in Alexandria's harbor was searched for books. If they found any, they seized them, took them to the library to be copied, and then they gave the copies back to the owners and kept the originals. They were literally vacuuming up the world's knowledge. And when you gather all that brain power and all that information in one place, the result is an absolute explosion of discovery. The scholars here weren't just preserving old ideas. They were making intellectual leaps so massive, the world wouldn't see their equal for nearly 2,000 years. Just listen to some of the things they figured out here. Over 1,700 years before Copernicus, a guy named Aristarchus proposed that the Earth revolved around the sun. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of our planet with about 99% accuracy. Euclid basically wrote the book on geometry. We still use his stuff. They were building early steam-powered machines. And for the first time ever, doctors were performing scientific dissections of the human body, completely revolutionizing medicine. It's just incredible. So if this place was such a beacon of human intellect, so important, what happened to it? Well, the popular story, the one you've probably heard, is that it all went up in flames in one single catastrophic fire. But that's a myth. And this is really the central mystery, isn't it? If it wasn't one big fire, how could something so monumental, so vital to civilization just fade away? How does it just vanish from history? The reality, as it turns out, is a lot messier, and frankly, a lot more tragic than a single fire. The library didn't die in one big blaze of glory. It suffered a slow, painful death by 1,000 cuts. So the myth is simple and dramatic. One fire, everything gone. The reality? A slow, agonizing decay over hundreds of years. This wasn't a single event. It was a long, painful process of war, budget cuts, intellectual neglect, and one destructive event after another. You can actually trace the decline. It started as early as 48 BCE when a fire set by Julius Caesar in the harbor did burn some scrolls in a warehouse, but it didn't take out the main library. Then, about 3 centuries later, Roman civil wars wrecked parts of the library district. A huge blow came in 391 CE when a smaller, daughter library was destroyed by a mob. So by the time of the Arab conquest in 642 CE, the Great Library itself was probably already a ghost, just faded away after centuries of damage and neglect. So, what does this all mean? What was the ultimate price for this slow, grinding destruction of knowledge? What did humanity actually lose? Because it wasn't just about ancient scrolls turning to dust. It was so much bigger than that. We lost entire futures, potential paths of science and discovery that were just snuffed out before they ever had a chance to start. Just try to wrap your head around a fraction of what vanished. The vast majority of plays from geniuses like Sophocles and Euripides, gone. The complete histories of entire civilizations like Carthage, told in their own words, not by their conquerors. Records of powerful African kingdoms we barely know anything about. Designs for advanced machines that were centuries ahead of their time. We lost the life's work of thousands of brilliant minds whose names we will never, ever know. If there's one lesson the story of Alexandria screams at us across the centuries, it's this. Knowledge is fragile. It is not a given. It's a flame that has to be actively protected and passed on. Because when we fail to do that, civilization doesn't just stand still, it can actually go backwards. So I'll leave you with this thought. The loss of that library cost humanity entire futures, and it forces us to look around and ask, in our own age of digital information, what knowledge is the most fragile, and what is our duty to protect it for all the generations yet to come?